Welcome to the newest episode of Beyond the Fame with Jason Fraley. I'm your host, Jason Fraley, picking the brains of the top filmmakers, musicians, and artists of our time. Father's Day is Sunday, so today we have a very special conversation with George Stevens Jr., founder of the American Film Institute and son of legendary Hollywood director George Stevens. You'll hear us go in depth about his father's greatest films, from Shane to A Place in the Sun. But first we start with his most epic masterpiece, Giant.
I mean, this is 1956.
Yeah.
This is 6 years before even To Kill a Mockingbird. I mean, this is way ahead of its time in terms of race relations. You had your dad's movie, Giant, and then John Ford's The Searchers, both dealing with racial, prejudice in different ways, Native Americans and Latinos in the South.
Right.
But how's your dad, what's the secret to doing something ahead of its time? It's easy to make a movie in hindsight, kind of ride the wave, but how do you do it, like a Spike Lee, Do the Right Thing, or your dad with Giant? How do you catch the cusp before it's happening?
Well, I think first you have to have a perspective on justice and humanity, which my father had a very solid and progressive perspective, and he'd just come back from the war where he'd been filming combat from D-Day on through the end of the war and into the concentration camp at Dachau. He had his own unit. General Eisenhower put him in charge of combat photography for the war in Europe, and they went on D-Day and covered it all the way to the end. So he had a point of view, and the story of the Mexican-American boy in Giant, played by Sal Mineo, called Angel Obregon, who was a boy who grew up on the great Riata Ranch. And Dad changed that story a little bit, because in the story, Angel Obregon goes to war and comes back, and his story goes on, but Dad had Angel Obregon come back in a flag-draped coffin, and the funeral of Angel Obregon is one of the most touching moments in the film.
Is the notion sort of, if he can fight and die for our country, why can't he just be afforded basic rights?
Right, and that's a perspective that my father picked up during the war. He remembered a Life magazine story about coffins coming back from overseas. So I think that's how somebody taps into that and decides you're making this movie, that's going to be an important part of it.
Yeah, the Sal Mineo character and serving your country is one aspect. There's also, with the Dennis Hopper character, he takes a Latina wife. The mother is a little more accepting of it because she's sort of the progressive thinker. And this is 11 years before Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. Your dad's way ahead of its time on multiple things.
Yeah, he understood the human condition, and he saw the drama in that. And it is the story of Rock Hudson, the king of this ranch down in Texas, who's a good man, but he's kind of set in certain ways. And it's the story really of him becoming a bigger person through his marriage to the Eastern girl, Elizabeth Taylor.
Yeah, I've always viewed, in a way, it's almost like it's got the size and scope and spectacle of a Gone with the Wind, but almost the answer to it in terms of now finally the social justice is caught up to, what's addressed in that.
Yeah, that Rock Hudson growing up, and he has his dreams for his family, and he's shocked when his son, played by Dennis Hopper, marries the Latina, played by Elsa Cardenas. And then he ends up, at the end of the film, he's there with his wife, looking back on his life, and there's a playpen, and there's his two grandchildren, a little blonde girl and a little Hispanic boy.
And behind him, there's a white sheep and a black sheep. Your dad was really genius with some of that symbolism.
Yeah.
That's mise en scène, folks. Absolutely. And then right before that, remember, there's the scene in the diner.
Yes.
Talk about how pivotal a scene that is, because for the whole movie, you might think the title Giant is just because it's a giant spectacle movie or a giant ranch or, James Dean on these giant oil rigs or, but it's in the scene in the diner. And then when he's laying there bruised and battered, looking at the two, mixed race kids that you're talking about, that the title finally comes into being. How you become a giant.
That was a scene created for the movie. It wasn't in the book. or I believe the scene was in the book, but the Rock Hudson character wasn't in the scene.
Yeah.
And that they go into this diner, and there's a big guy named Sarge who runs the diner, and there's 4 Mexican Americans, elderly couple, and come in and sit down, and Sarge tells them to get out, and Vic says, Sarge, I think you ought to let those people stay, and he tells him to mind his own business, and Vic starts this fist fight, and it's a titanic fist fight, and he gets knocked into the jukebox, and it sets off the music. And
is it Yellow Rose of Texas, or it's something like, it's some Southern anthem? Yeah,
the Yellow Rose of Texas, and these 2 huge men fight, and Vic, man that is approaching 60, ends up on his back, salad all over him, and Sarge throws the sign on him, "We reserve the right to refuse service to anyone."
Yeah, and we saw that play out throughout the Civil Rights era. I mean, if you like Selma, check out Giant. I mean, these movies have been made for a long time.
Right.
It's such a powerful movie in that regard. And you mentioned, we were talking about the playpen, and we started going into how your dad populated it with, the colored sheep in the background. Mm-hmm. He used directorial techniques to really work on your subconscious, I think, a lot. Mm-hmm. There's a scene earlier on, I think they're arguing about whether a white doctor can tend to one of the Latina babies. I think that winds up being Sal Mineo. I'm pretty sure the baby grows up.
That's right.
Okay. So earlier on, when he's first born, they're arguing over this, and it's subtle, but I think it works subconsciously. It's really brightly lit, but then when he goes for the reverse shot on Rock Hudson, it's really dark, and it almost cues us in who we're supposed to sympathize with. I don't know. Did you ever pick up on that, or is that just?
I don't recall. I don't recall that, but it could be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Check it out next time. I want to give your dad credit for it. But another cool thing was when Mercedes McCambridge, who later voiced The Exorcist, right? Mm-hmm. Here in D.C. She's riding on her death ride on the horse. Your dad uses that right before she's bucked off. We go from this extreme wide shot, and you talk about that in your book, extreme wide shot, to that really close up on the spur. I mean, talk about your dad in terms of a daring filmmaker in that regard, to just kind of break rules like that.
Yeah, I mean, they used to say he made his films in the editing room. He'd shoot a lot of film, and then he'd look for the best way to tell the story, and that's instinct, to do something that's going to arrest the audience's attention and have that foreboding that all is not well in this horse ride.
Did you view him like that throughout his career, just to be able to, I'm going to break a rule here every now and then? I mean, it's a traditional storytelling structure most of the time, where it's not French New Wavy or anything, no. But every now and then there's those little things like that spur.
He was very imaginative at using the screen, the moving image. And he did it usually not to call attention to itself. I mean, the lawn dissolves in A Place in the Sun. We're talking about another movie now. Mm-hmm. But he would use the full force of the medium. Mm-hmm. But he also had an expression, he never wanted the audience to be looking at the picture and be thinking about the cameraman with his hat on backwards, riding the crane.
Noticing the process.
Noticing the picture, yeah.
But no, I mean, that's an admirable thing, to want to remain invisible and you're not being flashy. But at the same time, he is, it's not a cop-out either. He's actually doing stuff subconsciously on you. You're just not always noticing it, which I think's part of his genius. Right. I think. I mean, there's he's in the conversation of the great directors, right? There's like everyone else. There's a little more people, and then there's the greats. So he's always obviously up here. But among the greats, I've always found him I think he's a little underrated. I think he needs even more esteem up among the Hitches and the Fords.
I think that one of the things is Hitchcock, the master of suspense. Mm-hmm. John Ford, he made great westerns.
Right.
Ford did more than that.
Right.
My father just played the full spectrum of comedy, drama, mm-hmm. Adventure. Mm-hmm. I mean, Gunga Din, the more the merrier.
Astaire Rogers.
Swing Time, the best Astaire Roger film of all. And so he never wanted to be pigeonholed, and sometimes it's easier for the critics if they can pigeonhole somebody,
slap a label on you,
and wrap it up and tie a ribbon around it. And he has more dimension than that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, with a picture like Giant, you have that's like a big, social conscious, Stanley Kramer style, social justice movie, but with like a Gone with the Wind lavish spectacle. But then also James Dean's last movie. But then with A Place in the Sun, you have this wonderful romance, those tight shots kissing, and but it's also like a thriller and a courtroom drama.
Yeah.
I mean, he could do everything. My favorite shot in A Place in the Sun, when Monty Clift gets done sleeping with Shelley Winters and he's leaving the place. Your dad just goes in on that radio, right?
Yeah.
And it goes from night to day on that radio.
And the chilling sound of the factory whistle going off.
Yeah.
That it affects you.
Yeah.
Physically. I mean, it's ominous.
He found ways to do sights and sounds to convey stuff that, in a modern a movie today, a lot of filmmakers probably would just show them, them making love right on screen, and it'd be this salacious thing, 50 Shades of Grey or whatever. But isn't there an art to be able to convey that with a whistle or an alarm clock fading from night to day that's more artful, I think?
And a remarkable scene in A Place in the Sun is when Shelley Winters goes to see the doctor. And you couldn't talk about abortion. You couldn't use the word. And it says everything, with this old doctor, and, there's a subtlety that lets the audience do a lot of the work. You've got a role to play in that scene.
I think that's a key. I think filmmakers need to give the audience more credit. Like, I think they're up to the challenge more than you think. I mean, do you think your dad viewed it as...
He did.
I don't need to do hand-holding.
There used to be the studio mantra in the old days was, the audience has the intelligence of 10-year-olds, or, and I have often said, what did you learn working with your father for many years? I did. And my answer is respect for the audience, that he respected the audience and gave them credit for being able to be partners in the telling of the story. And that's, I've always felt was a strength of mine, that I had that belief.
Absolutely.
And didn't want to talk down to them.
It's really smart. And a good lesson to pass down. Where were you? I mean, we've talked a lot about your dad's career because it's so legendary, but where were you along the way here? I mean, how old are you when he's making, let's say, Shane? Are you Brandon DeWitt? You're older than that.
I was older than that, but the summer before he made Shane was my first summer in college, and I worked for him, and I had two jobs. One was to break down Theodore Dreiser's American Tragedy.
Wow.
List every scene in part one and part two.
This became A Place in the Sun, right? Yeah.
Right. And the other was to read books that came from the studio or screenplays, and one day I read his book. A lot of junk, and this small book came, and I read it. And I went to see my father that night. He was in bed reading. And I said, I read this story this afternoon, and I thought, I think it's a really good story. I said, you ought to read it. And he said, well, why don't you tell me the story? So I was kind of pacing around his bed trying to tell him the story of Shane.
Oh, wow.
And the next summer I worked with him on it. And then that's me there in that top of those two photographs with Rock Hudson on Giant. I was in the Air Force when Giant was made.
Wow.
But I visited it quite a bit.
What was it like where'd you read the Shane or the
No,
the
it was
book?
a book.
But do you remember where you picked it up? Like, how did you stumble on it?
It came from the studio.
Okay,
with a bunch of stuff.
I got you.
Yeah.
So what's it like to be pacing around that bedroom? He's in bed right now, and you're walking around, and you're reciting the story of Shane. That's just that's unreal.
And I'm sure, he was a great man and a great father. But he was he was going to read the book, but I think he thought it was probably good batting practice to let me think.
Yeah.
put you in the position of telling a story.
Right.
And
did you have Alan Ladd in your mind when you were?
No. In fact, in Dad's copy of the book, I gave all his papers to the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, where I'm doing my papers. And on the scene where Jack Schaefer writes about the chopping the stump.
Oh, yeah.
Outside, and Dad wrote on this margin, Monty will have to muscle up for this scene.
So he thought it would be Monty Clift.
Yeah.
Wow.
That was the first idea.
Well, yeah, I mean, he just got off a movie with him, I guess.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I know you weren't DeWild's age, but I've always just in terms of the career, I've always pictured you like that, watching your dad. Like your dad's Shane, watching your hero, and then learning from it. And then,
Right.
But yeah, I mean, let's go a little bit more into your career too, because your dad has left a huge legacy, obviously. But I mean, just like I was telling you with your two books here, the Conversations with the Great Movie Makers of Hollywood's Golden Age. I mean, you did these in conjunction with American Film Institute, right?
Well, one of my career, I came here having worked in Hollywood, finished working with my father last on The Diary of Anne Frank, and we were about to start The Greatest Story Ever Told. And then Edward R. Murrow asked me to come and work with him at the USIA, United States Information Agency, under Kennedy. And I ran the motion picture program there. And during that time, the National Endowment for the Arts was created, and they didn't know what to do about film. And my advice was asked, and I suggested a film institute. And so then I became the founder of the Film Institute. Did that for...
the fact that you founded that is just
Yeah.
mind-blowing. I mean, that's... The AFI, I think, has done more. This is, biased opinion, but I think done more to just generate, film conversation and inspire young people to get into it with all the best lists and the countdowns they do and the AFI Silver and everything. I think it's just a priceless institution, and I just want to say thank you for doing it.
You're welcome.
How'd that come about? Do you remember the first mentioning?
Yeah,
of it?
well, I had, having come to Washington, realized that there was very little awareness about the value and potential of film. The film wasn't the center of the conversation the way it is now, and nobody knew the names of any directors, and it was sort of fashionable to say, "Oh, I never go to the movies,"
Right.
sort of a little East Coast thing there.
Right.
And as the idea for the endowment developed, I had been at the USIA. I started an intern program and a young filmmakers program to bring younger filmmakers into USIA. So I was on that track.
Right.
That and that the European countries had great film schools and we didn't. And we didn't preserve our films, and they were disappearing and deteriorating.
Rotting away.
Yeah. So, the Film Institute was kind of organic to me when the opportunity presented itself.
Yeah. Are you amazed to see how it's continued to flourish?
Yeah, I'm pleased that I figure I spent 12 years on it, which was longer than I intended, and then stayed on the board till today.
Yeah.
But I couldn't devote my life to it. I had other stuff to do. So, there's some things that we started a wonderful magazine called American Film, and that kind of collapsed, which that was a shame. And one of my ideas was that there would be a museum on the mall dedicated to film. So some of the dreams I had never got fulfilled. But
is it possible that could ever happen, or?
Well, I think they're now doing it in Hollywood. I think.
Okay. Right.
It would take a lot of engineering
and
political
effort. Just more on the AFI. I mean, I mentioned the 100 Years series. I'm a huge fan of those. I mean, it gives you a great primer. And not only just, if you want, you can print off the list and go down with a highlighter, like I did. But the television specials, you would get all of these filmmakers around, and you got to see, why Spielberg loved The Searchers, why Scorsese loved, whatever, the Citizen Kane, looking at it through the cinematic eye. And, those series, I mean, this is just personal opinion, but like I feel like those, really can serve as a great primer for new generations to come.
Yeah, no, I think, it's important. I mean, to respect the history of this medium, which is largely a product of America in the 20th century, and to respect that and to be knowledgeable about it. It's important.
And view it as an art form. I mean, it's art and entertainment. It's the spectrum, which I think your dad nailed too. Mr. Stevens Jr. here has done a series of Q&As he's compiled with every major filmmaker you can imagine, from Billy Wilder to Alfred Hitchcock to John Ford, and even newer ones. I think the second book has like Darren Aronofsky and some newer guys too.
Yes.
If I shoot out a name, could you just tell me a thought? Like, Capra.
He's a remarkable fellow. He was born in Italy and came to the United States and ended up making the most loved films of the 30s and early 40s. And he was about 5'7" and a feisty guy.
Yeah.
And
also shot like your father, right? Shot in war.
He headed up in Hollywood the Why We Fight series. Mm-hmm. And Dad told me when Capra came to the Pentagon one time, as I said, he was not a big man. He was a lieutenant colonel, and he came to talk to them about this movie program. And they walked in, and there were 10 generals. And they had all their and admirals, and they had all their uniforms on, and all at a big conference table. Yeah. And he shook hands with all of them, and they were all very polite. And he's in his colonel's uniform, lieutenant colonel. And finally it quieted down. He says, "Well, fellas," he says, "are we going to talk about motion pictures?" And they said, "Yes." He says, "Then I'll sit at the head of the table."
Awesome.
So that's Frank Capra.
I love that story. All right. And, God, Alfred Hitchcock.
He was so brilliant at being specific about how movies are made.
Yeah.
And he was contrary, and he would talk about that it's all preparation.
Yeah.
And he said that when I walk onto the set to start shooting a movie, I've made the movie in my head.
He's already seen it.
He said yes, and I'm really kind of bored to have to shoot it.
Yeah.
And he said, "Well, then why don't you let somebody else shoot it?" And he said, "I don't want them to screw it up."
It's true.
Yeah.
So that encapsulates him.
Yeah.
Billy Wilder.
Well, Billy Wilder, again, what's so remarkable about that era of motion pictures, that some of the funniest films, Some Like It Hot, to name one, made by this fellow who was born in Vienna and spoke with an Austrian accent till the day he died, but how the immigrant enriched this unique American kind of form of motion picture comedy. Yeah. And Billy Wilder, and before him Ernst Lubitsch.
Yeah, they worked together.
And others.
Yeah. I mean, it's we think it's it is the American Film Institute, but it's not all American natives. I mean, it's a lot of immigrant direct. I mean, even Hitchcock, we just mentioned, is from England, and all over the place.
William Wyler.
Yeah. What stood out from your chat with William Wyler? First thing that comes to mind.
Well, we were good friends, and he had gone also into the Army like my father, and he flew missions in B-25s over Germany, making a film called The Memphis Belle. He lost his hearing in one of those, in an attack on the plane he was flying in. Willie was again, not a big man, but with an accent.
Yeah.
And a great colleague of my father's. In fact, Frank Capra and William Wyler and my father started a company together. They were all lieutenant colonels after the war, and that Wilder, born in Toulouse, France, and comes to America and has a great career, gives it up to join the army, to go back to Europe and risk his life. These were great men.
Yeah. You feel like the same isn't asked of celebrities today.
No.
It's a smaller and smaller percentage that goes and fights such wars.
Yeah. But more concerned with organic food.
Yeah, right. Exactly. I don't know. Any I'm trying to think who else is. I mean, we don't want to go through all of them, but John Ford.
John Ford was Sean Aloysius O'Feeney was his name. And I think he was born in Maine of Irish parents, and he was older than these ones that we talked about a little bit, but colleagues, also fought in World War II. And he just had this great Irish-American sensibility that applied to Westerns or comedies. And there was just tremendous heart in his work. And he loved, American history and had a way of presenting it.
And we've talked. A lot of the people we've talked about were kind of the golden age, so to speak, of your dad's generation of filmmakers. Yes. As that torch got carried into, sort of the more maverick, Easy Riders to Raging Bulls phase, or I'd put it at 67 probably, right? Mm-hmm. Bonnie and Clyde on maybe. It was this new flowering of what film could do. What was your take on that whole era? I mean, different from your father's generation, but great filmmaking in a whole new way. It was almost the French coming back, inspiring them.
Yeah, that was The Godfather. There's some wonderful films in that period that, I think judge filmmakers by their body of work.
You're the auteur.
Well, maybe William Wyler said it when we gave him the Life Achievement Award in his acceptance speech. He said, "I'm not sure whether I believe in the auteur theory," he says, "but I know I'm the only director in Hollywood who can pronounce it correctly."
There you go.
So these were men of humor.
Absolutely.
And most of them also liked a good drink or a few drinks.
Yeah.
And it was a hard living bunch in those days.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you'd seen a lot and been through a lot. Let's say that. What about the state of cinema today? Technology has changed so much in terms of distribution, streaming online. Cameras are becoming way more portable now. Someone can pull off something like Birdman and do a single take and the illusion of it, at least the whole movie. I mean, there's some cool new avenues out there. But what's your take on it? I mean, a lot of people are also hesitant on, for every Birdman, there's like 9 tentpole superhero movies too, which they obviously have a place. But where do you think we stand now? Do we need to recalibrate it all, or you think we're healthy, or where do you think we are now?
It's very hard to guide. With the American Film Institute, we had this idea that some training and a serious place where people could learn filmmaking from the masters, which was the Center for Advanced Film Studies that we set up in Los Angeles, where David Lynch and Terrence Malick and a lot of other wonderful filmmakers have come out of. But I think it's hard to say, we ought to insist on more of this or insist on more of that, because it is this free enterprise thing. And what interests me right now is the really high quality of work being done for television in the broadest sense.
Yeah.
True Detective.
Amazing show, right?
Beautiful filmmaking.
Yeah.
And
those 8 episodes can go up against a movie.
Absolutely. And that's where people who have some kind of more seriousness of purpose might end up making their films and doing it very well.
Right.
And you notice more and more good directors doing work there,
Absolutely.
whether it's Netflix or HBO or Showtime,
AMC,
because they can tell the stories they want to tell.
yeah.
And the big investment in the movie business these days, when the era where I was, when my father, Fred Zinnemann, David Lean, William Wyler, and John Ford, they were making the big pictures every year.
Yeah.
I mean, the
CinemaScopes and the VistaVisions and the...
and the stories.
Yeah.
Lawrence of Arabia, A Man for All Seasons, Giant,
Yeah.
The Searchers. Now, the big investment is going to the tent poles, and that's not where the great filmmakers are working.
Right.
And so the films that end up getting award consideration are usually films made for much less money.
Right.
And I thought it was a good thing when the Lions' share of the resources would go to a David Lean
Right.
to make a Zhivago or a Lawrence
Or River
Kwai,
yeah.
or to my father to make Giant or
Yeah.
A Place in the Sun or Shane.
How did that splintering happen? I mean, like you said, that David Lean or your father would get, the big budget. What would be going now to, the tentpole movie would be going to those, what were considered the great artful filmmakers of their time. How did that splintering happen? I mean, kids aren't going to see the great art movies anymore. Back in the day, it was all one.
Yeah.
So how did that splintering happen? Was it the sequel era of the 80s? Was it I don't know. What do we attribute that to?
Is it Jaws gone mad?
Yeah.
I mean,
Jaws is a great film, but yeah.
But it
on
exactly
steroids.
that. I guess Star Wars was the one that set it off.
Yeah.
These studios, international corporations, they have found that the way to make a lot of money is to make these so-called tentpole movies and hope that they can build a theme park and merchandise a lot of goods with it.
Right.
With
the built-in brand probably of something that already exists before the movie, like a comic book.
And those are, for the most part, films that don't attract the best filmmakers because they might have, want to make, something a little truer to their own identity.
Personal expression,
Mm-hmm.
personal film, yeah.
Yeah.
Is that genie? I mean, in a way, I feel like that genie's kind of out of the bottle. It's hard to, it's almost severed where, the movies that are made for the summer are making gobs of money. They're always the top grossers, but they're hardly ever around come award season. It used to be Sound of Music was the best picture and the highest grossing movie of the year. I mean, is that genie out of the bottle? Is that split going to go on, and we just have to kind of,
you never know.
Yeah.
I guess that's what led me to talk about the good work being done in television or on the home screen, if you will. And, nothing is forever.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah.
You and I don't have the answer.
I wish we could. But yeah, television I think is, True Detective. Are you a binger? Are you a binge watcher?
I have done a little of it. And we have big screens at home.
Yeah.
I was watching The Masters on Sunday.
Nice.
And, the picture is just so, and I was thinking my father used to love golf.
Yeah.
And, it was black and white or even color.
Yeah.
But this high definition, you can have.
See the tee flying off the tee box.
Absolutely. You can have a great experience at home watching a movie.
Yeah.
That's, maybe not quite what the theater is, but it's comparable. Right. Whereas before, I'm still a big fan of the experience in a theater.
It's a communal experience. Everyone in the dark at once.
Nothing
you can't match it.
Right.
But what's your take on film versus digital? You mentioned the HD at the Masters. These cameras can catch a lot.
Yeah, and good filmmakers are able to offset that sort of bright digital
Right.
quality.
Right.
But I hate to see film go away.
Yeah. Well, you started the American Film Institute.
Right.
It wouldn't be the same if you...
Right, exactly.
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time. And I think your dad will continue to look even more in a favorable light when the ahead of his time filmmaker even becomes more and more ahead of his time as more time passes.
And the one film of his that was not a great success financially, and one of the most ambitious films he made was The Greatest Story Ever Told, The Life of Jesus,
Yeah.
which I think over time is going to become a hugely respected film. It was very respected when it came out.
But it's kind of gotten lost in the shuffle.
Well, and there were some critics who really took after it. But it's a serious telling of this story that has fascinated mankind for generations, the story of Jesus.
Yeah.
And that he made it so that it could be accepted by the believer, but also could be respected and be engaging to the non-believer.
So you think it's a bit of a hidden gem now?
I do.
Yeah.
I do. It's one of the most beautiful films ever made.
Yeah, I've seen it. I think I've seen it once, but I want to go take a look at it again.
Yeah.
Really? Okay. So why do you think that is? It's what's going on in that movie that stands out to you?
That's a very important story.
Yeah.
And it is told with such intelligence and such drama and such cinematic grandeur, both in the big sense and in the small sense. And you watch how, you enjoy seeing how scenes are staged and how story is told. This is it's a sleeper.
It's the sleeper hit. So everyone's seen Ben-Hur, but go back, maybe check out the hidden sleeper.
And I was thinking about it when on Easter, ABC ran the Ten Commandments, which they run every Easter, which is really kind of a bogus movie, if I dare say. It's
right. With all due respect, Mr. DeMille.
Yes.
But so you think The Greatest Story Ever Told could be? You would like to see it become that annual? If it could,
I think because it's informative and true, and real effort to capture the what was so remarkable about this life.
Right.
And
that people are still talking about it.
Played by an extraordinary actor named Max von Sydow, who
from all the Ingmar Bergman movies.
From the Ingmar Bergman films, but he was somebody you really could believe that this may be Jesus as opposed to, the actors who were movie stars who played it.
Yeah, when you've sat across from death and played chess against him in an Ingmar Bergman movie, you're allowed to be Jesus, I think. I think that earns your cred.
That's right.
Well, thanks so much.
Okay, wonderful.
Thanks so much for joining us on Beyond the Fame with Jason Fraley. Remember to hit the subscribe button and give us a 5-star rating if you like what you hear. We'll see you next time. I wanted to take a second to tell you about an app I really enjoy. Living in the DC area is great, and Podcast DC gathers all of the local shows that I like all in one local app. Health, sports, local news, politics, and so much more. Podcast DC is the new local app with hundreds of DC area podcasts to choose from. I can earn exciting rewards just for listening and share the podcasts I love instantly. Available in the App Store or in Google Play, listen local with Podcast DC.